The restaurant was too warm. I remember that specifically, the kind of warm that makes you aware of your skin, aware that you're sitting in your body, aware that other people are looking at you. My mother stood up with her wine glass, and everyone went quiet the way they do. I was 30 years old. I just cut into a cake shaped like a book, because someone had remembered that I liked books. I want to say something, she said, and she was smiling that particular smile. The one that meant she thought she'd thought of something clever. When we adopted our daughter, we didn't know what we were getting. But we knew we were getting a tax break, and honestly, best decision we ever made. The room laughed. She sat back down. I didn't move. My fork was still in my hand. I could feel the heat of the candles on my face, and beneath the table, my fingers were gripping the edge of my seat so hard my knuckles went white. Everyone was looking at me now, waiting to see if I would laugh too. Waiting to see if this was the kind of thing where we all pretended it was funny. It wasn't funny. The thing about realizing you've been the joke your whole life is that you have to go back and reinterpret everything. I was 3 when we adopted me. The photos show a small, serious child with braided hair and eyes that were already skeptical of joy. My parents were in their early 40s, older to have a young child, but determined. My mother would tell the story of finding me at the agency. We walked in, and there you were. We knew immediately. It was the story of choosing. It was supposed to feel like love. Except I started remembering things differently after that dinner. Like the time I was 12, and my mother was at a dinner party, and I heard her tell someone, we almost couldn't afford the adoption fees, but the tax deduction made it feasible. Technically true. Also technically not the full story of what should be a conversation about how much your child cost you to acquire. I'd been in the living room, pretending to read. Or the year I turned 18 and applied for scholarships. My mother sat at the kitchen table, early morning, before my father came down, and said, you know, we could have sent a biological child to college, but we chose you. Make sure you get good grades. She wasn't being cruel, I thought. She was being practical. She was reminding me of the investment. I brought home straight A's that semester. I always did. Excellence as gratitude. Gratitude as obligation. The patterns were everywhere once I started seeing them. When my father got sick, 5 years before that dinner, my mother was the one who had to manage everything. The medical bills. The insurance. The logistics of decline. He died on a Tuesday in March. I drove 6 hours to get there, but he was already gone. At the funeral, my mother held my hand, actually held my hand, and said, I'm glad I have you. You're the strong one. I was 25 and had been crying since the highway. But I held her while she slept that night in my childhood bedroom. That was the year I got the promotion that made me financially independent. That was the year things shifted, though I didn't understand it then. My mother started talking more about the early years. How hard they'd been. How much energy it took to raise a child who wasn't biologically theirs. How people didn't understand our family. How she'd sacrificed. Not in the gentle, reflective way parents sometimes do. In a way that implied I owed her something ongoing. That the debt didn't have an expiration date. I paid for her vacation that year. And the next year, I helped with her car payment. And the year after that, I was the one who called to check in, who drove the distance, who made the holidays happen at my place because she said she was too tired. This was normal, I thought. This was what children did for parents. What adopted children did for parents who'd chosen them. 6 months before my 30th birthday, my father's will was finally settled. There were some complications, medical debts, disputed claims. It took 2 years of lawyers and paperwork, but eventually his estate was distributed. Nothing enormous, but enough that I could finally think about buying a house instead of renting. That's when my mother started asking about my finances. Not directly, never directly, but in the way she'd always done it, wrapped inside concern. Oh honey, with those mortgage rates, you must be nervous. How much are you putting down? And then later, you know, I've been thinking about my situation. I'd like to eventually come live near you. Would you have room? I bought the house. A small 2-bedroom cottage with a yard. In a town 40 minutes from where I was working. It was mine. The first time I stood in the empty living room, I cried. Not sad tears, but the kind where you're overwhelmed by your own autonomy. I didn't tell my mother the price, but I told her about the closing, and I asked her to come to the celebration we were having. A small thing, just a few friends, the weekend after we got the keys. You're all grown up, she said on the phone. You're finally becoming someone. That should have been a warning. 3 weeks before my 30th birthday, she called me with an idea. I'm going to throw you a big party, she said. 30 is huge. It's a milestone. I want everyone to know who you've become. I was hesitant. We weren't a fancy party family, but she was so excited that I said yes. I let her plan it. I let her choose the restaurant, send the invitations, arrange the cake. I think I was still trying to earn the version of love she described to me. The day before the party, I went home to visit her. She had photo albums out on the coffee table, pictures from my childhood. Me at 3, adjusting to a new bed. Me at 6, on my first day of school. Me at 12, at my adoption day celebration, holding my parents' hands. Look how happy you were, my mother said, pointing at that last one. You knew how lucky you were. I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger yet. A kind of pressure building. I did, I said carefully. I was happy. I hope you still are, she said. Sometimes I worry that you've forgotten how much we did for you. Now that you're independent, sometimes I feel like you're distant. I was living 40 minutes away, calling twice a week, visiting every other weekend. I'm not distant, Mom. Well, she said, and she looked at the pictures again. I just wanted to make sure you knew what today meant. What it was supposed to mean. The toast happened at 8:47 p.m. I know because I looked at my phone automatically, the kind of automatic checking you do when you're anxious. I'd been anxious all evening, though I couldn't name why. There was an energy in the room that felt off, like my mother had been waiting for this moment. I wasn't shocked. That was the worst part. I was just, finally seeing something I'd sensed all along. The adoption wasn't about me. It was about her. It was an investment she'd leveraged, a sacrifice she'd weaponized, a choice she'd made that she believed entitled her to something forever. The room settled back into conversation. Someone was talking about their job. Someone else was asking about the book-shaped cake. My mother was sitting down feeling, I'm sure, like she'd said something charming. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just stopped. That night, I drove home in silence. Didn't turn the radio on. Didn't take the call she made to me 10 minutes after I left the restaurant. Hey, I'm sorry, that probably came out wrong. It did come out wrong. And it didn't. It came out exactly the way she'd been thinking for 30 years. I didn't call her back. For 2 weeks, I didn't call her back. My father had left his estate to both of us, with instructions that if one of us needed to be cared for, the other should provide it. He was always like that, practical, specific, anticipating the future. The house he'd owned was split between my mother and me. It was worth a decent amount. I'd never thought much about it. She still lived there. I'd assumed she'd die there. That was the natural order. Parents die in their own homes. Adult children help with the logistics. But at 2 a.m. on the 15th day after that dinner, I was sitting at my kitchen table with a lawyer's number on my phone, and a particular kind of clarity that comes only when something in you has already decided. I called her on a Tuesday morning. Hi, she said, and she sounded relieved. I've been hoping you'd call. I felt awful about. I've been talking to a lawyer, I said. There was silence. About what? About the house. About the deed. About the fact that you live in half of something I technically own, and more importantly, I'm tired of being afraid of you. Her voice changed. That's not fair. You're upset about a joke. It's not about the joke, Mom. It's about the fact that the joke is the truest thing you've ever said to me. It's the honesty that finally broke something. The adoption. You've spent 30 years making it clear it was a transaction. You pay, I owe. You choose, I'm grateful. You sacrifice, I perform. And I'm done. You don't mean that. I'm removing you from the deed, I said. I'm keeping my half of the house sale proceeds from when we sell it. And I'm telling you right now that this is the last time I'm going to explain why. So what, you're cutting me off? No. I'm setting a boundary. For the first time in 30 years, I'm saying, You don't get to use my existence as proof of your goodness. You adopted me. I didn't ask you to. You decided to. That was your choice. It was generous, maybe, but it doesn't earn you lifetime access to my guilt. She was quiet for a long time. If you do this, a lot of people will think you're ungrateful. Then they'll think that, I said. But I'll know the truth. The house sold 8 months later. The legal process was nastier than I expected. My mother fought the deed transfer through a lawyer for 3 months, claiming she had a verbal agreement with my father that the house would be hers. She didn't, but she claimed it anyway. It cost me money to prove otherwise. It cost me time. It cost me the version of my mother I'd been trying to see my whole life. But the deed changed. And when it did, something in me unlocked. I didn't expect to feel grief. The grief wasn't about her, exactly. It was about the childhood version of me that had needed her to mean the things she'd said. The young woman who'd built her entire sense of worth around gratitude. The daughter who'd stayed small partly so that her existence wouldn't feel like too much of a burden. I started seeing a therapist in month 3 of the legal battle. I don't know how to stop proving myself, I told her. Start by noticing when you're doing it, she said. I started noticing. All the time. With friends, with colleagues, with strangers who didn't know me anything and were never keeping score. I was so tired of performing excellence as a form of apology for existing. My mother and I didn't speak for 4 months after the sale went through. Then she called. Not to apologize. To announce that she was moving to Arizona to be near her sister. She didn't ask if I was okay with it. Didn't ask about my life. Just told me she was leaving, as if I'd been the reason she'd stayed. I hope you're happy now, she said. I hope the house was worth it. I realized then that she would never see it differently. She would live the rest of her life believing I'd been ungrateful. That I'd thrown away her sacrifice for a property dispute. She would tell people that story, and they would nod sympathetically, and no one would know the full shape of what happened. And somehow, that was okay. Because I knew. I knew that I'd spent 30 years trying to earn something that shouldn't have required earning. I knew that love without conditions was supposed to be the baseline for a parent, not a luxury. I knew that saying no to someone, even to my mother, was actually me saying yes to myself. The house I'd bought, the one that had started all this, was the first property I'd ever owned that wasn't borrowed against something else. Wasn't dependent on proving something to someone else. Wasn't conditional. I lived there alone for a year, and it was quiet in a way that felt like healing. My therapist asked me once if I regretted it. The confrontation, the deed, the choice to let my mother leave without chasing her. No, I said. But I'm sad about it. That's wisdom, she said. That's knowing the difference between regret and loss. I started journaling. Not in a therapeutic way, just writing out the memories I'd been too afraid to examine. The times she'd made me feel like a transaction. The times I'd made myself small so she wouldn't feel burdened. The moments I'd sensed something was wrong, but had been too dependent on her approval to name it. I was 25 when my father died. I was 30 when I stopped being her child, and became a person who simply didn't have a mother in the way I'd needed one. My mother sends a Christmas card every year now. Generic. Always signed, Love Mom. No return address. I don't send cards back. But I also don't carry the weight of her anymore. That's what the deed represented. A moment where I decided that I didn't have to. Here's what I want you to know, if you're listening to this. If you've ever been made to feel like you owed someone for the basic gift of being alive, this is for you. If you've ever performed gratitude so convincingly that you forgot it was a performance. If you've ever caught a parent, or anyone, using your existence as proof of their goodness. There's a particular kind of loneliness in realizing that someone who was supposed to love you unconditionally actually kept a very specific ledger the entire time. I think about that dinner sometimes. My mother standing with her wine glass, thinking she was being witty, and me 30 years old, finally understanding that the adoption was never about rescuing me. It was about her. Her legacy, her sacrifice, her right to something in return. The tax break joke was the honesty breaking through. The deed was me taking it back. There's a detail I didn't mention, something that happened about 6 months after my mother moved to Arizona. I ran into an old family friend at a coffee shop. She asked how my mother was, where she'd gone, and when I told her, she got quiet. You know, she said, your parents, your dad was always so proud of you. But your mom, she used to talk about it differently. She'd mention the adoption in the middle of conversations that had nothing to do with it. Like she needed people to know she'd done something hard. I didn't know what to say. Your dad, though, she continued. He just talked about you like you were his daughter. Not our adopted daughter. Just his daughter. I always thought he understood the difference between choosing something and bragging about it. That hit something in me that I'd been carrying without realizing it. My father never made me prove anything. I think that's what saved me. Not emotionally, but in my ability to eventually save myself. Because somewhere in my childhood, there had been a version of love that didn't ask for payment. It had been quiet. It had been shown in small moments, in the way he asked about my day without expecting gratitude, in the way he believed I could figure things out without reminding me of the price of my own existence. So here's the thing I wish someone had told me earlier. You don't owe anyone gratitude for meeting your basic needs. Not your parents, not your partners, not anyone. Gratitude is something you give when you genuinely feel it, not something you owe because someone made a choice about you before you were old enough to consent. And I'm not saying cut everyone off. I'm not saying blow up your family for a bad joke or a hurtful comment. But I am saying, notice when someone is keeping score. Notice when love feels like an investment rather than a gift. Notice when your role is to make someone feel good about themselves rather than to actually be loved. And don't wait 30 years to notice it. The part that still catches me off guard is how much lighter life became when I stopped trying to earn the one relationship that should have been unconditional. I built a chosen family instead. Friends who ask how I'm doing without expecting an answer that also proves their goodness. A therapist who doesn't make me feel grateful for her job. A few carefully selected people who see me and like what they see, with no ledger involved. Is it what I wanted as a child? No. I wanted my mother to be the kind of person who could love without condition. I wanted the story of my adoption to be about rescue instead of transaction. I wanted to exist without having to justify it. But I couldn't have that. So I had to build something else. And that's the thing about taking back the deed. It wasn't really about the house. It was about taking back my autonomy. About saying clearly, you don't own this. You don't own me. My existence is not a debt you're owed for repaying, and my independence is not ingratitude. Sometimes I think about what my mother tells people about all this. How she frames it. How she's made herself the victim of an ungrateful daughter, who threw away her sacrifice for property. And I don't correct the story anymore. Because I know what actually happened. And that's enough. Not to make it hurt less. But to make it mean something. To make it a moment where I chose myself, finally, the way my father had always chosen me. The way a parent should have chosen me the first time. The house is paid off now. I redecorated it. There's a guest room that I barely use because the people who would stay there are the people who chose to stay in my life, not the ones who were obligated to. My mother moved back to the city 2 years ago. I saw her once at a grocery store. She was older. Smaller somehow. She saw me and looked away. I saw her and kept walking. I don't know if she still tells the tax break joke at dinner parties. But I know that I will never again pretend it was funny. And I know that somewhere, if my father were still here, he'd be proud of me for finally understanding the difference between obligation and love. That's all it took, 30 years, one terrible joke, a lawyer, and the willingness to let go of someone who was never really letting me hold on anyway. That's the deed. And it's mine.